Hey, welcome to another episode of Spirit-Anointed Leadership, a podcast designed to help us go further in our leadership journey. Ha! That's so funny. I love stealing other people's stuff, but I really am glad that you're with us today. And Wes, I'm just thrilled that you're with us today. Thanks again for joining me. And Wes and I, we're going to talk about a subject matter that, can I just be honest with you, most pastors avoid. And I just got to say, we avoid it to our own peril. And what we're going to talk about today is finances in a pastor's home, finances in our world and in our lives. And what I know is that we are so incredibly, as a group of people, I'm not saying perhaps you, I just, generally speaking, pastors tend to be pretty insecure about talking about finances, specifically their own personal finances. And Wes, one of the things that you and I have talked about personally before is that I just think that there's this, pastors have this internal thought that they're supposed to be an expert on everything, including personal finances. And so there's almost this imposter syndrome that they get into, feeling like, hey, I'm supposed to know everything, but in all reality, they don't know a whole lot, and they don't want anyone to know that they don't know a whole lot, so they go underground with that. And you and I haven't talked about this beforehand, so this is just raw. But would you say that that was your own personal experience? And has that been an experience, because you've been in ministry your whole life, would you say that what I've stated here at the very beginning is true, that pastors are really insecure to talk about personal finances?
I think that's absolutely true. And I think because our lives are so public in so many ways, we really don't want people to know about our personal finances. So it's hard to talk about it with anybody in the church family. And if you're in a relatively small town, you don't even want to go to a financial advisor because you don't want them knowing your personal financial business. So I do think it's really easy for it to be an underground issue for pastors.
And that's just it. We're going to talk about that in today's podcast. They feel isolated, like I have no one to talk to about this stuff. And that ends up making the problem that much more worse. Because they just say, what am I supposed to do? No, I'm not happy with where my finances are now. I don't feel good about my financial future necessarily, but I feel trapped in that way. And where I end up getting involved in the conversation is finally pastors are old like us, and they get to this stage, and all of a sudden they begin panic. Like, maybe Social Security, if they even have Social Security, maybe that's gonna, not be enough. And maybe there's not enough in whatever pension plan I'm part of. And if we're part of the Great Lakes region, is there enough in my Wesleyan pension plan? Those kinds of things. And so, and I would say, again, it's a double whammy, because we feel like my personal finances are not everything I want them to be, and yet I feel isolated and alone in that. And I'm just begging you, don't stop listening to this podcast. If I bore the daylights out of you in about 4 or 5 minutes, then fine, shut us down. But please keep listening for a few moments, because I think there's going to be some real help for all of us as we talk through these things. But here's what I want to say. Wes and I are not financial experts, okay? We haven't taken a slew of financial classes. We're not financial advisors. That's not who we are. But I have to tell you, I've come at this having to learn things on my own. My parents made plenty of money, as I've said on this podcast in the past, but they were not great stewards with it at all. And so I've had to learn everything about financial money management on my own. And my guess is that you had some of that same history. Your parents were evangelists. They traveled all over the country in a big old motorhome and
lived by faith, offering to offering.
Really? Yeah. So whether we're eating at McDonald's or the steakhouse depended on how the last revival that we just left from went, right? And so I just think that as it turns out, here's one thing I guess I would say, and I'm not trying to embarrass him, but today, literally, after I'm done filming this podcast, I'm actually heading out to go to my doctor for my annual physical. So once a year, we sit in a doctor's office and we go through all that. And I've already done all my blood work. My blood work came out great. So I think I'm in pretty good health. But still, every year, that's just a pattern that a lot of us are in, is we go to a physical doctor to get insights on how we're doing physically. Well, in the same exact way, I think we need to have a regular rhythm where we're asking ourselves, how is the health of our finances? what does that look like? What does that mean? So, okay. With that as kind of a background, let's talk about just, Wes, you and I, some basic financial goals, 5 of them. It's all we're going to do is talk about 5. And the first one is get out of debt ASAP. And that's going to mean that we're going to have to say no to some good things. And I have to tell you, so I'm 58 years old right now. I was probably 45 years old and still carrying some credit card debt. And I'm not trying to make anyone feel guilty about the credit card debt that you have right now. That's not my spirit or my heart at all. All I'm simply sharing is that our culture and our society today just sees it normal as having a credit card balance. And in today's high interest rates, oh my goodness, it's just killing people, and it's killing a lot of our pastors. And so I just, Wes, when did you win the credit card war? And we haven't even talked about this beforehand, or did you ever have that was that ever an internal thing for you at all?
Yeah. Well, Val and I initially in our ministry didn't make very much money at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my initial church planting project, I made $9,000 a year. Wow. Yeah, so little bitty money.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, my wife is a teacher,
okay,
and so that supplemented things. But yeah, we struggled for a number of years just to be able to pay the bills. Wow. So we did have some credit card debt, never massive, but we often carried a credit card balance in those early years. Yeah. And then in our 40s, we decided, you know what, enough of this. Let's just get this taken care of. And so we just made it a priority and got completely out of debt in our early 50s, and we were so thrilled. And the peace that brings and the freedom it brings to be generous when God prompts you to be generous is an absolutely beautiful thing. Yeah. And if I could just say one other thing, I think the implications for pastors' financial health are so significant, because I think it's really hard for a pastor or a leader to lead their church into financial health if their own finances are a disaster and a mess. We're making financial decisions when our own house is in order. So I think it has implications for us personally and for our ministry.
Yeah, and I haven't done a study on this. I bet you somebody has. But I bet you if our own finances are in total disarray, the chance that we're actually going to get up and talk about financial stewardship principles from a pulpit, we're just not going to feel any kind of authority to be able to do that. And so we just avoid it. So then the problem gets worse, is that, we're in financial disarray. Our church is in financial disarray. They can't afford to pay us any more money. And it's a cycle thing, right? And I mean, we here, if you're part of the Great Lakes region, we want to come in and talk to your board about making sure that you're paid as well as you can possibly be paid. Wes and I both go in and talk to boards when we do a pastor's review. And one of the things that we do in that pastoral review is we ask about, we want to know, we get the numbers of how much pastors are being paid. It's a big deal. I want pastors to be generously paid. I absolutely do. I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big proponent of that. And I will lovingly fight for that when I'm sitting down with the board. But in order for that to happen, there has to be money. In order for there to be money, we have to talk about good stewardship principles. In order for that to happen, we have to feel at some level secure about our own finances. But you mentioned a second ago, which is actually our second principle. So the first one is get out of debt, which means there's this old statement that my mom used to make that said, nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. And in the same way, I think we don't enjoy anything as much as being out of debt. There's just a sense in which that there's just freedom that comes with that. But number 2, then you mentioned something that you and Val had a conversation, and that's what I want to talk about. Is that set some financial goals together. If you happen to be married, set those financial goals together. So many couples can't talk about money. As a matter of fact, to be really honest with you, research says that there's more fights in marriage about money issues than any other issue. That's the thing that couples have most stress about than anything, even more than porn, is about money issues. And to be really honest with you, Mary and I have struggled in the past to engage in those conversations. Now I'm going way back in our marriage, but to engage in those conversations in ways that were not emotionally charged. Because sometimes you've got a spender or a saver in a marriage, right? Or sometimes you've got, different financial priorities. And to force yourself to sit down like you and Val did in your 40s and say, you know what, we're going to stop this madness. But to have the conversation is so key. If I could beg you to do anything, I would beg you to sit down and have a conversation with your spouse, if you happen to be married, about how are we going to navigate our financial future? What is this going to look like? And sometimes you might need an outside person to speak into it. Sometimes you need someone who says, you know what, guys, would you think about this? Would you think about that? You need someone else to look perhaps at your budget or whatever, and look at those things. But please have that conversation. Anything you would say about that?
I would say it is such an emotional conversation, and you have to, with God's help, with the Spirit's help, I think, refuse to be defensive. This is ultimately the money that God has given to our family and is blessing our family with. It's His money, it's our money, so how are we going to steward it well?
Yes. And I think to have that conversation when we sit down and say, okay, this is God's money, this isn't Wes's money or Val's money, it's not Chris's money or Mary's money, it's God's money. How is He inviting us? How is He inviting us to steward this well? And I think starting there is a huge, huge help. Okay, so first of all, get out of debt, begin to go down that road. Number 2, have a conversation with a spouse you have to be married. Number 3, get an emergency fund. I just read the other day that a vast majority of Americans, way over 60%, could not write a $1,000 check for an emergency that they'd have to put it on the credit card. So the card breaks down. Something happens significant. It's $1,000. Most Americans today could not write that check. They don't have that kind of freedom. And what ends up happening as a result of that is you end up living with this great fear. Going back to what you said, the freedom that you feel once you're debt-free is massive. And I just can't tell you enough what that has meant to Mary and I, to make sure that there's an emergency fund. And I tend to be a bit, to be candid with everyone on this podcast. I heard Dave Ramsey say years ago that, you should have 3 to 6 months stashed away. And I just thought, 6 months of my salary, how am I ever going to get to that point? And all I would say is don't be legalistic about it. Allow the Holy Spirit to guide you and direct you in that. But when we get to a place that we can write a $1,000 check and not have it be the end of us, there is an incredible amount of peace that comes with that I think is God ordained. I understand living by faith. I totally understand that. But I don't think living by faith means that we don't have, for most of us anyways, that we don't have a financial, some kind of comfort zone that we live in that allows for freedom to write a $1,000 check when we need to. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of times because income is short and we have debt, we're not sure how in the world we're going to accomplish that. Yep. And that's where I really think we do need perhaps some outside people to be able to speak into that, to help us just figure out a plan to be able to go forward and get the debt paid, get an emergency fund established.
Yeah. And so number 4 then is begin to really think through your retirement plan. And I don't care how old you are. I don't care if you're 20 or 30. As a matter of fact, the younger you are, the better. And all I'll say is this. Some of you might have heard in the past here on SAL that I went 7 months without getting paid from our church because there was no money to pay me my salary. But there was money to pay my pension, which was 12% of my salary back then and still is today. And I just remember saying to the church, okay, don't pay me my salary. I'm going to go get another job. I'm going to figure that out. But please keep paying my pension. Because what I said back then to myself was, look, my life sucks right now, but I don't want it to suck when I'm 70. Like, you know what? I want to continue. So we continued to put money into the Wesleyan Pension Fund, which was my retirement plan. We continued to do that even when things were really, really hard. And I think what happens is people have that mindset reversed. It's like, oh, I'll start putting money into my retirement when I get to my 40s and 50s. And by then, oh my goodness, the catch up you're trying to do by that point is massive, just massive. And so the more money you put in your 20s and your 30s, the more it's going to pay off. Because as Einstein said, the most amazing math computation in the world is compound interest. It just works for you, man. It just works over time. And so, yeah, I just think thinking about that, thinking about your retirement plan early. And I was just with a guy by the name of Paul Anthus, who owns his own wealth management company, and is a solid evangelical Christian. He's been, for those of you who are in the Wesleyan tribe, he's been Wayne Schmidt's accountability partner for the last 30 plus years. And he said, I watch people make retirement decisions based either on fear or greed. And what he's saying there is and what I would encourage, again, I'm not a financial advisor, but so often we want to move our retirement funds around because this fund is doing really well this month, and this fund is and we end up hurting ourselves in the long run. Stick with a plan over the long haul would just be, I think, a real wise thing. So, okay, number one, get out of debt. Number two, have the conversation. Number three, with a spouse if you're married. Number three, think about, again, this emergency fund. Number four, talk about your retirement and work on it. And then finally, number five, and Wes, what I really want to talk about is seek financial wisdom. And you've done that. And again, I've had some incredible friends over the years that have helped me, as you indicated, oftentimes outside the life of the church, because it's way uncomfortable to talk to someone inside of our church. Because I think you said it so well, we're such public figures that to also open up that area of our life feels that much more invasive, I think. But seek financial wisdom. So where did you and Val go for that? What was your... Yeah.
So we, at about the age of 50, and I just turned 59, so at about the age of 50, we really realized that we needed some experts to be able to speak into that area of our life. I do have a pension fund that's been paid into for years, just like you, by churches. Val has pension things, and we had some IRAs and things. We wanted to make sure we were stewarding that well to set us up for retirement. Yeah. And so we did. We felt like it was a God-ordained connection with a group called Guardian Financial Group. Okay. They specialize in preparing retirement plans and financial plans for pastors. Okay. And I discovered in that connection that only 8% of Americans seek out any professional financial advice. Wow. Only 8%. Wow. And so if we make the decision to do that, we are getting ahead of the game and ahead of the curve for sure. So this particular group, we felt like God connected us to them because they actually provide a complimentary financial plan for every pastor in ministry. Wow. So you can take that plan and use it through them, or you can take it to someone else. Right. Pastors are so unique. We have such a unique status with the IRS, and there's so many unique things that most of us, even though we've been ministers for years, and most financial planners that are just down the block, they don't truly understand the tax code for ministers. So you need somebody who's an expert. Absolutely. And we felt so good about Guardian Financial Group because they specialize in this is what they do. They are the best financial planners for pastors in America. And so we felt they've given us great advice. And again, it allowed us to have so much peace that we had a team of experts speaking into this issue for us. And we could relax and enjoy now as well as our retirement because experts are speaking into this for us.
Yeah, because for instance, if you happen to be ordained, once you hit retirement, you can actually pull from your Wesleyan pension account to actually pay for your property taxes or whatever for housing. If you still owe on your mortgage, you can pay for all that. And that's unique. And so having that mindset, therefore it makes sense to have money here, all that. So let me close this particular podcast by saying this. To be candid with you, I'm thinking I was 25, 26, 27 years old. And I had a guy who did my taxes who said to me, "Oh, Chris, you need to get out of Social Security. You just need to get out of Social Security." And I listened to him, and I got out of Social Security. and I've never been able to get back in. I've tried. I know some of you would say, I'd love to be on Social Security. I've tried. I've never been able to get back in. And as a result of that, I don't have near the amount of Social Security that other people are going to have. What did I do? I listened to one person who was not an expert in pastors' finances, who had their opinion, and it cost me dearly. I'm begging you, please, there is wisdom in a multiple of counselors, right? Guardian Group is not, they're not paying for this podcast. That's not what this is about. But I would say go to Guardian, and we'll link them on our show notes. Go somewhere and maybe even go to a couple different people and get the wisdom that you need so that you can allow the Holy Spirit to give you great peace about this. The amount of peace that I'm living with today comparatively to what I was a decade or two ago is massively different. And that's just what I long for you. I long that you will live in the peace that I think Jesus wants us to have. Yes, ultimately trusting in Him, but also experiencing wisdom that comes from the counselors that He places around us or that we go to for His insights, for ultimately God's insights that flow through them. So thanks so much for joining us today. Would you do me a favor and would you please follow us? Would you please share this episode of Spirit-Anointed Leadership Podcast with someone that you know could glean from it and learn from it and needs to find their own financial freedom, their own financial plan going forward? And finally, let's put it this way. If our minds are constantly worried about our finances and we can't give ourselves to the passion and the movement that God and the mission that God has given us of reaching lost people for Jesus. So this is all about, I want to be in a healthy place so I can win more people to Jesus. Remember, that's ultimately our mission and what we're going after. Thanks so much for being with us today. I hope you have an awesome week. I'm looking forward to seeing you next Monday for another episode of Spirit-Anointed Leadership.